Helen Clark was a simple housekeeper when she discovered that the millionaire patriarch of the family she worked for was not in a luxurious clinic, as his son told everyone, but chained like a prisoner in the basement of his own mansion. From the moment she decided not to pretend she hadn't heard that groan coming from downstairs, a web of lies, ambition, and cruelty began to be unmasked, and the courage of an invisible woman forever changed the fate of one of Manchester's most powerful surnames. This is a story of faith, justice, and redemption, in which even the heaviest chains can become a path to freedom. Prepare yourself, because this story will stir your heart. Subscribe to the channel, leave a like on this video, and comment below where you're watching from. Helen Clark was 32 years old and had hands that had known the weight of labor since she was a girl. The daughter of a bricklayer and a laundress, she had grown up watching her father come home with an arched back and her mother with fingers red from scrubbing other people's clothes. She had learned early on to work in silence, but never to accept injustice, without something aching inside her. There was a restrained courage in her, kept like an ember under ash, a sense of justice that wouldn't be extinguished, even when everything conspired for her to lower her head and move on. The Ashworth mansion stood at the top of the Willows, a neighborhood in Manchester, an imposing three-story structure with manicured gardens and wrought-iron gates. Helen had been working there as a housekeeper for nearly 2 years and knew every corner of that house. The cold marble of the entrance hall, the smell of wax on the wooden stairs, the hum of the central air conditioning that never stopped. Her routine began at 6 in the morning and ended when the last light went out. Folding towels, stretching sheets, aligning cups, polishing mirrors. Every gesture had to be perfect, invisible, as if the house tidied itself. In the pocket of the white apron she wore every day, Helen carried a worn rosary, its dark wooden beads already smooth from being touched so often. Her faith wasn't one of speeches or just Sunday masses. It was made of small gestures and whispered prayers while she scrubbed the marble floor, while she went up, and downstairs while she prepared trays. Sometimes, when the day was too heavy, she would grip the rosary tightly and silently ask God to give her the patience to endure the condescending looks, the orders given in a commanding tone, the words that made sure to remind her that she was just the maid. One name haunted that house like a ghost: Joseph Ashworth, the 80-year-old patriarch. The photos on the walls showed a smiling man in a felt hat and with open arms at family parties. There was a large black and white one in the main hallway where he appeared next to an elegant woman and 2 small children. In another, more recent and in color, Joseph smiled in front of a birthday cake, surrounded by people. But Helen had never seen him in person, not once. Marcus Ashworth, the millionaire's son, repeated to anyone who would listen that his father was in an excellent private clinic, treated with all the care money could buy. He said this in work calls, in casual conversations, always with a calm smile and a firm voice. But Helen saw things that didn't fit this story. Torn bank envelopes with Joseph Ashworth's name in the trash. Controlled medications with a prescription in the old man's name appearing and disappearing from the pantry without explanation. Extra plates of food that went down to the service area on covered trays and didn't come back. Staring at those old portraits hanging on the walls, Helen felt a tightness in her chest. She remembered her own grandfather, a bricklayer like her father, who had died at 76, still working because he had no other choice. She remembered his dignity, his pride in never having asked anyone for anything. And looking at Joseph's smiling face in the photographs, she felt a responsibility growing inside her, uncomfortable and insistent for that invisible old man. She carried a guilt that wouldn't heal. Years earlier, while working at a public nursing home in the Greenwood district, Helen had reported the mistreatment of a 79-year-old woman. She had taken the case to the coordinator, to the social worker, even going to the ombudsman's office. She was accused of being a liar, of making up stories for attention, of wanting to harm good people. She lost her job within a week, and 2 months later, the elderly woman she had tried to protect died. The news came through the newspapers in a small corner of the page, without fanfare. Since then, the fear of not being heard and the dread of confronting powerful people followed Helen like a shadow. But so did the memory of that woman, her eyes pleading for help, and the question that would not be silenced: what if she could have done more? Even so, two objectives began to guide her now, in that silent mansion. To find out if Joseph Ashworth was truly safe, and if he wasn't, to find a way to help him without endangering her younger sister, Julia, who depended entirely on Helen's salary to pay for nursing school. Every pound counted. Losing her job would mean abandoning the girl's dream. The practical obstacle was before her every day: the basement door. It had recently been reinforced with a new heavy golden lock, and a camera installed just above it, blinking with its red light. Raymond, the groundskeeper and security man, was the only one who went down there, always with trays covered by white cloths. He would come back up quickly, lock the door carefully, and hang the key on a personal keyring that never left his belt. The emotional obstacle was deeper and hurt more. Every memory of past humiliation dried Helen's throat when she thought about questioning Marcus. She saw herself again before the nursing home director, hearing that she was hysterical, that she didn't know what she was talking about, that people like her didn't understand the complexity of things. The words still burned. Still, Helen continued to note everything in the kitchen stock ledger, that blue binder where she recorded groceries and cleaning supplies. Between the official lines, she had begun to write down other things: groceries that disappeared without explanation, controlled medications that went down in larger quantities than normal, times when the generator failed and left entire hallways in darkness, small, loose details that she still didn't know how to fit together. She also noticed other things: the heavy keyring hanging in the kitchen with old keys nobody used, the noisy service elevator, which creaked as it went up and down, the side gate for suppliers, always unlocked during the day, the simple cell phone in the pantry drawer, its battery dead for weeks. Everything seemed like a loose piece of a puzzle that Helen didn't yet understand, but which was beginning to take shape in her mind. That Thursday afternoon, the sky was heavy and grey. Helen went down to the pantry to get bags of rice and beans that needed to go up to the kitchen. The concrete stairs were cold and damp, and the hallway light flickered occasionally. The air near the basement door was colder than usual. The industrial refrigerator's motor rumbled loudly, a constant, monotonous noise. But behind that mechanical sound, Helen heard something else: a metallic dragging sound, slow, heavy, and then a hoarse groan. Human. Faint, but unmistakable. Helen's heart raced. Her hands trembled on the boxes of groceries she was holding. She stood still, holding her breath, trying to hear it again. The refrigerator's noise swallowed everything. But it had been real. She was sure of it. Without the courage to call anyone, without knowing what to do, Helen clutched the rosary in her apron pocket. Her fingers found the worn beads, and she whispered, in a thread of a voice that barely came out, "If you let me hear this, Lord, don't let me pretend I didn't." The hallway light flickered again. Helen picked up the bags of rice, with her still trembling hands, and hurried up the stairs, not looking back. But the sound remained in her head, that groan, that dragging of metal, and the growing, terrifying, and inevitable certainty that Joseph Ashworth was not in any clinic. He was there, right there, just beneath her feet. The next morning began with the sounds of status: imported cars entering the garage, one after another, a gleaming black Mercedes, a white BMW. The sound of the engines echoed through the inner courtyard. Then came the loud voices, laughter from Marcus's office on the second floor. He was on the phone on speaker, talking about investments, about dinners with important people, about closing deals that would yield 7-figure numbers. His voice was confident, full of himself, the kind that doesn't expect to be contradicted. Helen was adjusting the tablecloth on the breakfast table on the terrace, smoothing every fold with her hands. She counted the white porcelain cups, checked that the saucers were aligned, made sure the coffee was just right, the milk was hot, and the fruit was cut the way Marcus liked it. On the outside, she was just another efficient, invisible employee doing her job. Inside, every sense was on high alert, still fixated on the groan from the night before. That sound kept echoing in her head, giving her no peace. As she went about her usual tasks, Helen began to see signs that had once seemed common, normal. part of the routine. In the laundry room, while sorting clothes to be washed, she found an empty package of a controlled medication among the towels. Diazepam, the label said, with Joseph Ashworth's name printed in small letters. The prescription was recent, from 3 weeks ago. In the kitchen trash can, while collecting the day's garbage, she saw pieces of a bank envelope torn in half. The old man's name appeared in gold letters in the corner. Premium Management. Exclusive account. In the hallway leading to the pantry, the same one where she had heard the groan, there was a faint smell she couldn't immediately identify. Medicine mixed with mold. Something that had been closed up for too long. Something that didn't breathe fresh air. Each clue emerged from a simple act: collecting clothes, taking out the trash, cleaning steps. But now Helen saw everything with new eyes. In the kitchen, Martha was stirring a large pot of beans. She was almost 60, with grey hair tied in a tight bun, and had worked in that house for 15 years. She was about to retire and spoke of it every day, counting the months, the weeks, like someone marking tallies on a prison wall. That morning, while seasoning the beans, she commented in a low voice, almost a whisper, "You know, Helen, the other day I heard some strange noises down near the basement, like, I don't know, a groan? But it must be the old plumbing, right?" Before Helen could answer, Raymond entered the kitchen. He was a large man, with broad shoulders and thick hands, an ex-policeman who now worked as a groundskeeper and security man. He was in his early 50s and had a way of looking at people sideways, always measuring, always watching. Hearing Martha's comment, he gave a half smile and said firmly, "It's just the plumbing, Martha. This house is old. The pipes make noise. You know how it is." His gaze, however, demanded silence. It wasn't a suggestion. It was a warning. Martha lowered her eyes and went back to stirring the pot. She just wanted to make it to retirement, alive. Her motivation was simple: endure without trouble, without getting involved, without losing the money she had been saving for years. She couldn't afford to take risks. A little later, Michael arrived through the side gate for suppliers. He was young, about 25, dark-haired, thin, with an easy smile, and eyes tired from working too much. He delivered vegetables, fruits, and produce to the mansion 3 times a week. He always carried heavy boxes on his shoulders and chatted with everyone, polite and friendly. That morning, while unloading boxes of tomatoes and lettuce, Michael commented to Helen about his grandmother, Celia, who was 82. She had been waiting for months for a test at the local health clinic. Months. Michael worked hard, making deliveries for 3 different places, all to be able to pay for his grandmother's medication, which cost a fortune. He hated injustice. Helen could see it in the way he spoke, in the heat that rose in his voice when he talked about the endless queues, the rushed doctors, the lack of dignity. "It's infuriating, you know, Helen," he said, placing a box on the counter. "My gran worked her whole life, paid her taxes, raised 4 kids on her own, and now when she needs help she's left waiting. Meanwhile, there are people who—" He stopped, biting his lip. He didn't need to finish the sentence. They both knew what kind of people he was talking about. Helen looked at Michael intently. She recognized something in him, genuine indignation. It wasn't just complaining. It was a deep-rooted anger, the kind that doesn't stay quiet easily. She filed that away in her memory. The primary antagonists were also coming into sharper focus. Marcus Ashworth flaunted donations on social media. He posted smiling photos with children at daycares, handing out food baskets, posing in front of banners with the family company's name. He talked a lot about caring for our elders, about social responsibility, about honoring those who built this country. But when anyone asked questions about his own father, about where Joseph was, about when he would be back, Marcus deflected the subject behind a cold smile and canned phrases. "He's being well looked after. It's a matter of privacy. The family appreciates your concern." Raymond, for his part, always walked around with his personal keyring and watchful eyes. An ex-policeman, he had left the force after an incident of violence that had tarnished his name. Now he was paid well to be discreet, to do as he was told, to not ask questions. This job was stability. It was a chance to start over without the weight of the past, and he wasn't going to ruin it. That afternoon, as he passed Helen near the basement door, Raymond stopped. He looked at her with that way he had that made people lower their heads, and he muttered, his voice low but clear, "There are places in this house that aren't for everyone, Helen. Curiosity has killed a lot of people. You're a smart woman. You don't want to make trouble, do you?" The social message had been delivered. She was just the housekeeper. She was there to obey, to serve, to not question. Her place did not include asking questions. Helen felt her blood run cold, but she only responded with a nod and kept walking, her legs weak, her heart heavy. In the utility closet, a small cramped space where brooms, mops, buckets and cleaning supplies were kept, Helen was looking for a specific cloth Marcus had requested. As she moved things on the shelves, she bumped into something covered by an old sheet. She pulled the fabric away and found an old monitor, one of those CRT models, dusty, with tangled wires. On impulse, she plugged it in. The screen flickered, hissed, and then black and white images appeared. They were security cameras. Several angles of the mansion, the main gate, the garage, the second-floor hallway, and, in one corner of the screen, the basement door. Helen held her breath. This was an old system, probably forgotten when the new cameras were installed. No one was supposed to know it still worked. She watched the images. She noticed that at certain times, when the house's generator sputtered, something that happened frequently, the screen would freeze. The cameras would lose their feed for a few seconds, sometimes for a few minutes. There, a quiet turning point was born, kept like a seed. There was a forgotten eye that was also watching the one who thought he was in charge. Two obstacles took shape that day. The social one came in the form of humiliation. In the middle of the afternoon, while Marcus was in the living room with business guests, Helen dared to comment very carefully that the noises from the basement worried her. She said it while passing with a tray, almost without looking directly at him, as if leaving an observation in the air. Marcus laughed, loudly, and then, looking at his guests, at Raymond, at Martha, who was passing through the hall, he said, "Simple folk love to make up stories, don't they? I think they've been watching too much television." The others laughed too. Helen felt her face burn, but she lowered her head and left. The message was clear. She had no voice, no credibility. She was just the maid. The material obstacle arose when she realized that the basement key had been removed from the kitchen keyring, the one with the old keys nobody used. Now only Raymond had access, and he never went anywhere without that key on his belt. But Helen had kept something. Weeks ago, while cleaning the kitchen, she had found an old key forgotten in a corner of a drawer. Without quite knowing why, she had put it in her apron pocket. Now, looking at the locked door, an idea began to form. She knew a locksmith in the neighborhood, Mr. Davies, who worked on weekends. A trustworthy, discreet man. In a hurry on a Saturday morning, Helen went to his workshop with the old key hidden in her purse. She paid out of her own salary, money that would be missed from her tight budget. Mr. Davies made the copy without asking questions, but he looked at her in a way that suggested he knew something serious was happening. Helen spent that night awake, sitting on the bed in her small staff room, holding the copied key between her fingers. The fear of being discovered was real, tangible, like a weight on her chest, but the memory of that groan was stronger. Every step forward took a toll on her body and soul, and she knew that sooner or later she would have to go down those stairs again. Over time, Helen began to see Marcus Ashworth without the filters of his public image. It wasn't easy. He presented himself to the world as a modern, elegant, successful man. He wore tailored suits, expensive watches, spoke 3 languages. He posted on social media about innovation, entrepreneurship, legacy. He was invited to give lectures. He appeared in business magazines. An exemplary son, the public narrative said, who had taken over his father's business and multiplied the family's fortune. But in the phone calls Helen overheard while passing through the hallway, cleaning, tidying, always invisible, another man emerged. Marcus spoke with his lawyer, Mr. Farris, about legal incapacitation, about transferring assets, about safeguarding the family's wealth. He talked with a private doctor, Dr. Santana, about medical reports, about a degenerative condition. about inability to manage his own affairs. The words were technical, cold, distant, as if Joseph were a problem to be solved, not a father. Marcus didn't see himself as cruel. Helen realized that. He truly believed. He was doing what was necessary. He would repeat to himself, sometimes out loud, that he was protecting the old man from his own fragility, that he was preventing his father from exposing himself to ridicule, that he was preserving the family's image. His moral boundaries were elastic. He accepted locking his father in a basement, but rejected any word harsher than containment. He justified everything with the logic of a spreadsheet. Costs, benefits, controlled risks. Raymond, the functional accomplice, carried trays 3 times a day. He descended the stairs with heavy steps, opened the locks with keys that never left his belt, delivered food and medicine, and returned in silence. He controlled who approached that door, watched the hallways, reported any strange movements to Marcus. Raymond carried a history. His name had been tarnished in the police force by an incident of violence that was never clarified in the papers, but that everyone whispered about. Dismissed, prosecuted, acquitted for lack of evidence, but forever marked. That well-paid, discreet job at the Ashworth mansion was the chance for stability he wouldn't find anywhere else. He told himself that Joseph was safer there than being shuffled around cheap clinics. He repeated, Marcus's justifications like mantras. The old man has dementia. He could hurt himself. It's for his own good. But sometimes, on his way back up from the basement, Raymond would avoid looking at his own wrists for too long, because he saw in them, by an involuntary reflex, the marks of chains on someone else's. The first major turning point came on a night of heavy rain. The sky poured down water with force, thunder echoed through the neighborhood, and the lights in the mansion flickered from time to time. The old generator in the house always failed on days like this. It always had. Marcus complained, said he would replace it, but never did. That night, around 10 o'clock, the entire house plunged into darkness. Helen was in her small staff room, lying down but awake, when she heard the generator cough and die. The lights went out. She lay still, her heart pounding. She knew the cameras also went off in those moments. She had observed this on the forgotten monitor. There was a small window, a few minutes long, when the electronic eyes were blind. She got up slowly, took the copy of the key she had hidden sewn into the lining of her apron, and went down the service corridor. Her bare feet made no sound on the cold floor. Her heart was beating so hard it felt like everyone in the house could hear it. She passed through the dark kitchen, guiding herself by memory, and reached the service elevator. Its motor was noisy, but the rain outside covered any sound. She went down to the sub-basement. The air there was different, colder, heavier. It smelled of dampness, of a place closed up for too long. The basement door was in front of her, locked, the camera above it dark. Helen took the key from her pocket. Her hands were shaking so much she almost dropped it. She took a deep breath, murmured a quick prayer, and turned the lock. The door opened with a slight creak. Helen stepped inside. The smell hit her all at once. Dampness, medicine, solitude. There was a dim light bulb hanging from the ceiling, powered by an independent battery, which provided little light. In the corner of the narrow room, on a makeshift bed of planks and a thin mattress, lay Joseph Ashworth. He was thin, much thinner than in the photos. His skin was pale, almost translucent. His white beard was untrimmed, grown out, messy. His hair was long and dirty. He wore an old t-shirt and a pair of worn-out pajama pants. A thin, frayed blanket covered his legs. And then Helen saw them. The chains. They were thin but strong, attached to Joseph's wrists by padded cuffs that fooled no one. The chains were fixed to the concrete wall, long enough for him to move a little, too short for him to reach the door. The thin skin of his wrists was marked reddish with old purple, bruises. Joseph's eyes, however, were alive, tired, deep-set, but alive. When he saw Helen standing in the doorway, he blinked as if in disbelief, and then, in a hoarse, broken whisper, he murmured, "You're not him. God took his time, but he sent someone." Helen felt her legs give way. She held onto the wall to keep from falling. She almost backed away, almost fled. The past came rushing back, violent, inevitable. The report at the nursing home, the disbelieving laughter, the dismissal, the death of the old woman she couldn't save, the fear of not being heard, the fear of being called crazy, a liar, someone who makes things up. She could pretend she hadn't seen. She could lock the door again and go back to her room. Keep her job, keep paying her sister's bills, keep surviving. But on the crate that served as a nightstand beside the bed, Helen saw a small notepad, cheap yellowed paper. There were phrases written in a shaky, almost illegible hand. Help. Get me out of here. Please. She remembered the torn letters she had found in the kitchen trash, scraps of paper with the same handwriting. Joseph had tried to ask for help. He had tried and been silenced. Helen approached slowly. She knelt beside the bed. Joseph looked at her with tear-filled eyes. She took his hand, felt the cold skin, the trembling fingers. "Mr. Joseph," she whispered, her voice failing. "I'm Helen. I work upstairs. I didn't know. I swear I didn't know." "He locked me up," Joseph said, between dry coughs that shook his thin body. "My son locked me up, said it's for my own good, that I'm sick. But I know who I am. I know my name. I know where I am. I just don't know. I don't know how long I've been here." The words came out in broken pieces, tired but lucid. Joseph explained that Marcus had started isolating him months ago. First, he took the phone out of his room. Then he forbade visitors. He said his father was confused, that he made things up, that he needed to rest. He brought in doctors who signed reports without looking properly, lawyers who prepared papers, and then, one night, Raymond brought him to the basement, said it was temporary, said it was to protect the family's image while they dealt with the situation. "He wants me to sign papers," Joseph continued, his voice fading. "Transfer of assets, power of attorney. He brings the documents, forces me to sign, says if I don't sign I'll stay here longer. I've already signed some. God forgive me, I signed because I was scared, cold, hungry." Helen felt her throat tighten. Tears streamed down her face without her being able to control them. The internal conflict burned like never before. The urge to flee, to protect herself, to not get involved, fought violently with her conscience, with the memory of the woman who had died, with the faith she carried in the rosary in her pocket. Upstairs, Martha was probably asleep, thinking only of reaching retirement. Michael was delivering vegetables, never imagining what was happening in that sub-basement. Raymond was on watch, an accomplice, telling himself he was doing the right thing. Marcus was posting smiling photos, building a flawless public image. And Joseph, trapped, invisible, was waiting. Helen stayed there for a few minutes that felt like hours. She held the old man's hand, wiped his tears with the sleeve of her own apron, tucked the blanket better over his legs. She couldn't remove the chains right then. She didn't know where the keys were, but she could do something. She had to. "I'm going to get you out of here, Mr. Joseph," she said, her voice firm now, holding his hand tightly. "I don't know how yet, but I swear to God I will. You're not going to die here, not while I know about this." Joseph squeezed her hand back with what little strength he had. "Thank you," he whispered. "Thank you for not pretending you didn't see me." Helen went back up with weak legs, her body trembling, carrying a secret that was too heavy to bear. The rain was still falling outside. The generator had started working again. The lights flickered and came back on. The cameras started recording again. But something had changed forever. She no longer had the illusion that she could remain neutral. She could no longer pretend she didn't know. Joseph had seen her. He had asked for help. And Helen, for the first time since the nursing home, since that woman's death, since all the times she had been called a liar, felt she had a chance to do things differently, a chance to be heard, a chance to save someone. And this time, whatever it cost, she was not going to give up. The next night, the mansion seemed as peaceful as ever. The lit windows illuminated the well-kept gardens. The cars slept in the garage. The city below glittered in the distance. But Helen's world was no longer the same. Since seeing Joseph chained in the basement, she couldn't sleep properly, couldn't eat without her stomach churning. Every time she passed Marcus in the hallways, She felt a lump in her throat. Every time Raymond went down with a tray, she wanted to scream. But screaming wouldn't solve anything. She needed proof. She needed help. She needed a plan. Helen had spent the previous day thinking, praying, taking notes. In her small staff room, on her narrow bed, she had drawn a mind map. Who could help? Who was trustworthy? Who had something to lose? Michael's name was at the top of the list. He had genuine indignation, a phone with a camera, and access to the mansion. Martha came next, with reservations. She was a good person, but she was afraid. She would need borrowed courage. That afternoon, as Michael was unloading boxes of fruit in the kitchen, Helen approached him. She checked to make sure no one was around, lowered her voice, and said quickly, "Michael, I need your help with something serious, very serious." He stopped, a box of oranges in his arms, and looked at her intently. "What is it, Helen?" She took a deep breath. Telling him was a risk, but not telling him was letting Joseph rot in that basement. Marcus's father is here, in the basement, trapped, in chains. Michael almost dropped the box. His eyes widened. He looked around and lowered his voice. "What? Do you mean trapped? Trapped how?" "Chained to a bed, thin, alone. I saw it with my own eyes. Marcus says his father is in a clinic, but it's a lie. It's all a lie." Michael turned pale. He ran a hand over his face, took a deep breath. Helen saw the same outrage she felt rising in him. "We have to report it," he said, his voice tense. "We need to call the police. Call someone." "Without proof, it will go nowhere," Helen cut in. "Do you think they'll believe me, the housekeeper, the delivery guy? Against Marcus Ashworth? We need concrete proof, something no one can deny." That's when she told him about the forgotten monitor in the utility closet, the old cameras that still worked, the black and white images that showed the basement door, and sometimes the interior when someone went down. Michael understood immediately. "You want me to film the screen?" he asked. "Yes. And if we can get an image of him down there, or of Marcus saying something, then we'll have proof." Michael agreed without hesitation. They arranged it in whispers. He would come back after his normal shift, pretending to have a late delivery. Martha, who had been passing through the hallway and overheard part of the conversation, stopped. She was pale, her hands shaking. "You're going to get into a world of trouble," she said, her voice thin. "Marcus, he has lawyers, money, powerful connections. If this goes wrong—" "And what if we do nothing?" Helen asked, looking her in the eyes. "What will happen to Mr. Joseph?" Martha looked down. She was silent for a long moment. When she looked up again, there were tears in her eyes. "All right," she said, her voice breaking. "I'll help. If you need me to, I'll keep Raymond busy in the kitchen. I'll make something up. But may God protect us." They all knew that messing with the Ashworths had a price, but once the truth of the basement was revealed, backing down felt too much like cowardice. Helen had studied the details of the house as if memorizing a war map. She knew that Marcus turned on the sauna every Tuesday and Thursday around 8 in the evening. The sauna's heater was powerful, strained the old generator, and sometimes caused brief power outages. She knew that the old monitor's cameras froze during those moments. She knew that the service corridor, rarely used at night, led directly to the utility closet without passing through the main kitchen. When Michael returned, it was almost 9 o'clock. He came in through the side door with 2 boxes of fruit in his arms and a ready excuse. "Sorry for the late hour, Martha. The truck broke down, the delivery was delayed." Raymond appeared in the kitchen, suspicious. He looked at Michael with his security guard gaze, measuring, evaluating. "A delivery at this hour?" he grumbled. "This is no time for that, son." Michael shrugged, keeping his cool. "I know, No, but if I don't deliver today, I lose the contract. The boss is demanding, you know how it is." Raymond was about to question him further, but Martha intervened. She grabbed his arm, groaning softly. "Oh, Raymond, I think I'm feeling faint, dizzy. Could you help me sit down? I think it's my blood pressure." He looked at her, annoyed, but he couldn't ignore her. Martha was a long-time employee, well known. If something happened to her there, it would be a problem. Grumbling, he helped her to a chair, went to get her some water, and asked if she wanted him to call someone. Meanwhile, Helen slipped down the narrow service corridor. Her heart was beating so hard it felt like it would explode. She passed the laundry room, the pantry, and reached the utility closet. With trembling hands, she turned on the old monitor. The screen hissed and came to life. Black and white images appeared. Several angles of the mansion. Helen adjusted it to the sub-basement camera, and then she saw them. Marcus and Raymond descending the basement stairs. She called Michael quietly. He quickly entered the small room, closing the door almost completely. He raised his phone and started filming the monitor's screen, knowing that those few seconds of audio and video could change everything. On the screen, grainy but clear enough, the basement door opened. Joseph's gaunt face appeared from an odd angle. He was sitting on the bed, the chains visible on his wrists. Marcus entered the frame holding papers, and then, through the static of the poor audio, Marcus's voice came through clearly enough. "Just sign it, Father. No one has to know you're here. It's for your own good and for the good of the company." Joseph shook his head, weak but resisting. "Marcus," insisted, his voice growing harsher. Raymond stood in the background, arms crossed, watching. Michael filmed everything. When Marcus and Raymond left the basement and the camera returned to showing only the closed door, he stopped recording. He looked at Helen, his eyes shining with anger and determination. "We got it," he whispered. Helen felt her legs go weak with relief and fear at the same time. There, the second major turning point was born. Suspicion had turned into concrete proof. It was no longer just her word. It was an image, it was a voice, it was Marcus, in his own words, confessing. Michael put his phone away and left through the side gate as soon as he could. At the gate he got an internet signal and immediately sent the video to the email of Father Augustine from St. Clair's Parish, a man Helen knew from Sunday Mass. Father Augustine was respected, had contacts, and was not afraid to confront injustice. If anyone could help, it was him. The video was sent using only existing resources: the forgotten monitor, the Wi-Fi that reached the mansion's wall, the delivery guy's simple phone. Nothing came from an easy miracle. It was the result of a watchful eye, shared courage, and a bit of luck. But the obstacles were not far behind. As she was leaving the utility closet, her heart still racing, Helen came face to face with Raymond in the hallway. He looked her up and down, his eyes narrowed, suspicious. "What were you doing in there?" he asked, his voice low but threatening. Helen felt her blood run cold. She needed an excuse. Quickly. "A floor cloth," she said, trying to keep her voice steady. "I was looking for a cloth I forgot here this morning." Raymond didn't seem convinced. He took a step forward. Helen stepped back, hitting her arm hard against the metal doorframe. A sharp pain shot up her shoulder, but she didn't cry out. She couldn't show weakness. "You've been very curious lately," Raymond said, getting closer. "I've already warned you not to meddle where you're not wanted." "I just work here," Helen replied, her voice trembling now. "I just do my job." He stared at her for a few more seconds. Then, finally, he stepped back. "Then just keep doing your job and forget the rest." Helen hurried past him, her legs weak. In her room, she took off her apron and saw the bruise already forming on her arm, purple and painful. Her body was paying the price for the risk, but she couldn't stop now. The next day, gathering all the courage she had, Helen went to the local health clinic. She knew the social worker there, Vera, a middle-aged woman who had always been kind. She told her the whole story: Joseph in the basement, the chains, the video, everything. Vera listened attentively, but her expression slowly hardened. When Helen finished, she sighed deeply. "Helen, I believe you, but going up against the Ashworth family. You know the weight that name carries in this city. They have lawyers, influence. If this goes nowhere, you'll lose your job, and maybe worse." "And if I do nothing?" Helen asked, her voice firm now. "He'll die down there, alone, forgotten." Vera was silent. Helen saw the internal struggle in her, fear battling against conscience. But in the end, fear won. I need official proof to file something like this. I need a medical report, qualified witnesses. I'm sorry, Helen, I can't take the risk." Helen left with a heavy heart. She had hit an institutional wall, fear of confronting a powerful surname, demands for official proof. whispers about losing her job if it came to nothing. But the threads were beginning to converge. Father Augustine, upon receiving the video in his email, watched it 3 times. He was horrified. He contacted a community lawyer, Mr. Reynolds, who worked on human rights cases. Michael, outraged, decided to share what he knew about the grocery deliveries that disappeared without explanation. Martha, gathering all the courage she had left, admitted she had overheard arguments between Marcus and his lawyer about incapacitating his father and transferring assets. Every small step came at a cost of exhaustion, sleepless nights, the veiled threat of dismissal. Helen felt the weight of it all on her shoulders, in her chest, in the bruise that ached every time she moved her arm. But silence now would cost even more. Joseph was still down there, waiting, believing that someone finally would hear him, and Helen had promised they would. In a few days, the story moved from the dark depths of the basement to places where the truth could be seen in the light of day. Father Augustine wasted no time. He watched the video Michael had sent, felt his stomach turn seeing Joseph in chains, hearing Marcus's voice coercing his own father. He immediately called Mr. Reynolds, the lawyer who worked on human rights cases and whom he knew from community work. Mr. Reynolds was a man in his 50s, with graying hair, thin-rimmed glasses, and a history of fighting difficult causes. He didn't have the Ashworths' money, but he had principles. After watching the video, he was silent for a long minute. Then he looked at the priest and said simply, "We're filing this today." With the video in hand, along with everything Helen had patiently collected over the weeks, they went to the police station. Helen brought copies of the pages from her stock ledger, where she had noted the medications that went down to the service area, records of times when extra meals were prepared, notes on the generator failures, all with precise dates and details. Nothing was based on supposition. It was the patient trail of a routine observed by watchful eyes. The detective who met them, Detective Miller, was a serious middle-aged man who looked at the unlikely group. A priest, a community lawyer, a housekeeper still, in her apron, with some initial suspicion. But when he watched the video, read the notes, and heard Helen speak with a firm, detailed voice about everything she had seen, his expression changed. "This is serious," he said, closing the file. "Very serious. I'm authorizing a welfare check today." Helen felt her heart race. It was happening. It was finally happening. The visit was scheduled for the next morning, a bright morning with a clear blue sky and strong sun, the kind of day that seemed to mock the darkness about to be revealed. A police officer, a social worker from the municipality, not Vera, but an older, more experienced woman, and Mr. Reynolds arrived at the mansion in an unmarked car. Helen opened the gate with ice-cold hands. Even though it was summer, she felt a chill. Marcus appeared in the entrance hall, impeccable as always in a grey suit, his hair combed with a polite but forced smile. When he saw the police car, his smile faltered for a second, but he quickly composed himself. "Good morning," he said, his voice controlled. "Can I help you with something?" The officer showed him the court order. Marcus read it, and Helen saw the color drain from his face, but he tried to buy time, as he always had. He spoke of a misunderstanding, said his father was traveling, that he wasn't home, that this was all a ridiculous mix-up based on employee gossip. "Mr. Ashworth," the officer said firmly, "we have an order to inspect the premises. You can either cooperate or we can enter regardless. Your choice." Marcus fell silent. His lawyer, Mr. Farris, who had arrived in a hurry, tried to argue, but the order was clear. They were going in. In the corridor leading to the basement, Helen guided the group. Her legs felt weak, but she kept walking. The familiar smell of dampness and medicine was already starting to emerge, even before they reached the door. The social worker wrinkled her nose. "What is that smell?" she asked. No one answered. When they reached the basement door, it was locked. Raymond was forced to open it. His hands trembled as he put the key in the lock. The door creaked as it opened, and the air that came out from within was heavy, cold, and thick. The social worker went down first, followed by the officer. Helen stayed at the top of the stairs, her heart beating so hard it hurt. She heard the social worker's muffled gasp. She heard the officer's low curse. And then Joseph's weak voice. "Who are you?" When Joseph appeared before witnesses, chained, thin, with an untrimmed beard and marked wrists, the silence that fell was as heavy as lead. The social worker had tears in her eyes. The officer was taking pictures with his phone, documenting everything. Mr. Reynolds moved about, checking the state of the room, the dirty mattress, the bucket that served as a toilet, the half-eaten tray of food. Marcus, who had followed the group down, tried to explain himself, still playing the game, still trying to control the narrative. "He's aggressive," he said, his voice still firm, but starting to crack. "The chains are on medical recommendation. My father has dementia, he has outbursts. I had to protect him and protect everyone." "Recommendation from which doctor?" the officer asked, turning to him. Marcus hesitated. He didn't have a ready answer for that. "And that video was filmed out of context," he continued, pointing at the officer's phone as if the video were there. "These people," he pointed. To Helen, to Michael, who had rushed over upon hearing about the visit. "They want money. They're trying to extort me. It's a setup." "A setup?" Helen said, her voice louder than she intended. "A setup is locking your own father in a basement." Marcus looked at her with pure rage, but he said nothing. What could he say? The news spread through the neighborhood before the sun had even set. Social media, WhatsApp groups, street corner conversations. The Ashworth son was keeping his father locked in the basement. Joseph Ashworth was in chains. The housekeeper found out and reported it. Some neighbors claimed to be shocked. Others confessed they had always found it strange, that mansion where a father was never seen again, where there were no visitors, where everything seemed too quiet. The authorities were torn between the weight of the surname and the public scandal that could no longer be suppressed. In the midst of this whirlwind, Helen had to face her greatest obstacle, the fear of once again being treated as a liar. The preliminary hearing took place on a rainy Friday at the Central Courthouse in Manchester. Helen arrived early, accompanied by Father Augustine and her younger sister Julia, who had skipped a day of college to be there. Michael came too in a borrowed dress shirt, nervous but resolute. Martha was sitting on a bench in the hallway, praying quietly, her fingers intertwined. Helen wore the simplest clothes she owned, a dark skirt and a white blouse, the rosary hidden in her pocket. She sat before the judge, Judge Wallace, a man in his 60s with thick glasses and a serious expression. She felt her hands sweating, her heart racing. She could have answered with the bare minimum. She could have said she wasn't sure about anything, that she was just doing her job. It would have been easier, safer. But when the judge asked, "Are you certain of what you saw?" Helen took a deep breath. She looked at her hands, then at the judge, and she chose to speak. "I am, Your Honor. I saw Mr. Joseph chained in the basement. I saw the marks on his wrists. I heard him ask for help. And before that, I heard noises, saw medication disappear, saw food being taken downstairs, saw torn letters in the trash. It wasn't just once, it was many times. And I wrote it all down." She detailed, with a forced calm, every night of strange noises coming from the sub-basement, every torn envelope with Joseph's name, every controlled medication that vanished from the pantry, the scornful laughter when she tried to ask questions, the forgotten monitor in the utility closet, the copy of the key she paid for out of her own salary, the encounter in the basement on a rainy night, Joseph's thin face, the chains, the thin blanket, the fear and pleading in his eyes. Every word brought back the pain of the past, the memory of the nursing home, the dismissal, the death of the elderly woman. But it also brought the weight of someone who had seen the truth up close and could no longer pretend. Michael was called and confirmed the grocery deliveries that didn't match the house's consumption. He showed the video he had recorded from the monitor screen. He explained how it had worked, how he had managed to film it, why he had decided to help. "My grandmother is 82, he said, his voice firm. "She waits months for a single test. Months. And this man locked up his own father. To steal from him. I couldn't stay quiet." Martha, called next, was trembling so much she had to hold onto the table, but she showed the old notes in her personal notebook where she recorded recipes and purchases. It proved that special meals were prepared at odd hours, in quantities that made no sense for the household. "I knew something was wrong," she said, wiping away tears. "But I was afraid. Afraid of losing my job. Afraid of not being heard. But Helen was brave. And I couldn't leave her alone." Father Augustine presented documents proving that donations promised by Marcus to local nursing homes had never arrived, that his name was used in advertising campaigns, but the money never appeared. The subplots all fit together there, in front of everyone, reinforcing the main storyline. Marcus and his lawyer tried to dismantle each testimony. They claimed Helen was resentful, that Michael wanted money, that Martha was easily influenced, that the priest was interested in getting media attention. But the video was there, the notes were there, the photos of Joseph's marked wrists were there. And in the end, Joseph himself was brought in to testify. He entered the room, supported by a nurse, thin but on his feet, his beard now trimmed, wearing clean clothes. When the judge asked if he had been held against his will, Joseph looked directly at Marcus and said, his voice weak but clear, "My son locked me up. He forced me to sign papers. He told me it was for my own good, but I knew it was a lie. I just wanted to get out of there. And this young woman," he pointed to Helen, "she saved me." The silence that followed was absolute. Leaving the courthouse that day, under the light rain that was beginning to fall, Helen made no speech. She gave no interviews to the journalists who were starting to gather at the entrance. She just lifted her eyes to the cloudy sky, took a deep breath, feeling the cold water on her face, and in silence, with her hand on the rosary in her pocket, she thanked God for finally being heard. A few months later, the consequences were scattered across the city like marks left by rain after a storm. The Ashworth mansion still stood at the top of the willows, as imposing as ever, but it was no longer untouchable. It no longer inspired only respect. Now it also inspired shame, whispers, uncomfortable questions about what else might be hidden behind beautiful gates and well-tended gardens. Legal proceedings were underway, piles of paper in law offices, hearings scheduled and rescheduled. Assets were frozen, bank accounts blocked. The Ashworth family name, which for decades had been synonymous only with power and success, now carried a stain that couldn't be washed away with money or influence. Marcus Ashworth was facing charges of false imprisonment, mistreatment, coercion, and fraud. The accusations were serious, and no matter how much his lawyer tried to negotiate, mitigate, or delay, the facts were all there. The video, the photos, the testimonies, the chains. There was no erasing it. As part of a plea deal, to avoid an even harsher sentence, Marcus was ordered to finance projects for the protection of vulnerable elderly people in the region. Residential care homes, psychological support, home visit programs. Money he would have stashed in offshore accounts now went to keeping alive the very people he had scorned in his empty speeches. The irony was not lost on anyone. He no longer set foot in the mansion. He lived in a smaller apartment downtown, far from the spotlight he had once loved. He avoided going out, avoided social media, avoided mirrors. He now carried the weight of his own name, like a stone tied around his neck. Raymond, the groundskeeper and security man, confessed everything in a long afternoon of testimony. He told how he had accepted the job knowing something was wrong, how he had turned a blind eye to the chains, how he had carried trays and medicine as if they were just neutral tasks. He confessed in writing, his voice trembling, that he knew Joseph wasn't violent, that the chains weren't necessary, that it was all a lie told so many times he had almost believed it. For cooperating with the investigation, for showing genuine remorse, Raymond received a lighter sentence. Community service, 300 hours. He was now serving them at the same care home where Joseph lived, working as a gatekeeper, helping with maintenance, carrying groceries, fixing faucets, learning, slowly and painfully, to look at the elderly without averting his eyes, without pretending not to see. Joseph no longer saw damp walls or chains. He no longer heard the hum of an industrial refrigerator or smelled the scent of mold. He now lived in a simple care home connected to St. Clair's parish, a modest place but full of light and life. He had his own room, small but airy, with a wide window that overlooked a garden where roses, jasmine, and papaya trees grew. The window was open most of the day, letting in the morning sun, the song of birds, the smell of damp earth after the rain. He received regular medical care. Dr. Pereira, a general practitioner who volunteered at the home, visited twice a week. Joseph had gained weight. His skin had regained its color. His beard was always trimmed. He wore clean, simple, comfortable clothes. And on the chair beside his bed rested the same felt hat from the old photos, the one he wore to family parties, ready for his walks in the small garden. The marks on his wrists were beginning to fade. New skin was growing over the scars, slowly but surely. The wounds of the soul took longer. Joseph still woke up sometimes in the middle of the night, in a cold sweat, thinking he was back in the basement, but then he would open his eyes, see the window, hear the wind in the trees, and remember. He would remember that he was free, that there were people around, that he was not alone. With each passing afternoon, he breathed a little easier. Helen did not return to the mansion. When the legal process began, when the lawyers called asking if she would accept financial compensation to avoid causing further trouble, she hung up on them. She didn't want the Ashworths' money. She wanted dignity. She accepted an offer to coordinate the day-to-day operations of the care home where Joseph now lived. Her experience as a housekeeper, all that attention to detail, that quiet and meticulous care, was transformed into service with a purpose. The old stock ledger, which she had used to note down clues in the mansion, now recorded other things: quantities of rice and beans, medication schedules, coffee preferences, the small joys of the residents. Mrs. Amelia likes her coffee stronger. Mr. Anthony prefers to sleep with the window closed. Mrs. Teresa loves cornmeal cake. Each note was an act of love disguised as organization. Julia, her younger sister, now a qualified nurse, helped out at the care home. On weekends, she distributed blankets, checked blood pressures, chatted with the residents, smiled easily. She looked at Helen with pride, with gratitude. She knew the price her sister had paid to do the right thing. For the first time in her life, Helen didn't feel like she was just passing through anywhere. She didn't feel invisible. She didn't feel less than. She felt part of something that made sense, something bigger than herself, something that truly mattered. The relationships born from pain also solidified. Martha, now retired with her pension secured and her fear finally released, showed up at the care home every week. She brought cakes, pots full of food, loud laughter. In the kitchen she commanded as she always had, but now without the weight of forced silence. She taught recipes to the volunteers, told stories, played with the children who visited their grandparents. Michael visited on weekends, always laden with fresh fruits and vegetables. His grandmother, Celia, had finally gotten the test she had been waiting for months. Her treatment had begun, and she had improved a lot. Michael spoke of this with gratitude, knowing that Helen's fight had opened doors for others too, that the report had shaken the city and forced improvements in public services. Father Augustine circulated among the tables at lunchtime, listening to stories, giving blessings, praying, laughing. He saw in that care home the proof that it was worth fighting, even when everything seemed impossible. And Raymond, now the gatekeeper serving his sentence, was slowly learning to look at the elderly without looking away. He carried his guilt like a scar that wouldn't heal, but he also carried a sincere desire to make amends. He helped fix what was broken, painted walls, changed light bulbs. Sometimes when Joseph passed through the gate, for his afternoon walk, the two would look at each other. They didn't speak. They didn't need to. The silence between them said everything. On a warm November afternoon, with the sun beginning to set over the simple courtyard of the care home, Joseph was sitting on a concrete bench under the shade of a jaboticaba tree. He wore his felt hat, his legs finally free, without chains, without pain. He was talking with Mrs. Teresa and Mrs. Amelia, two other ladies who lived there, about the old days, about recipes, about life. Children from the neighborhood on a visit. From the local school ran between the benches. They brought drawings, sang songs, asked innocent questions. Joseph held a drawing a 6-year-old girl had made for him, a house with a sun, flowers, and a smiling old man, and felt his eyes well up. Helen closed the notebook she was updating, leaned against the kitchen doorway and just watched everything. The father, who had once been chained, was now receiving a glass of orange juice from a little girl with pigtails. Martha was laughing loudly in the kitchen, telling a joke to the volunteers. Michael was fixing a leak in the bathroom with Raymond's help, both of them sweaty but focused. Julia was helping Mrs. Amelia up the ramp, holding her arm gently. There were scars. There was pain. There were legal proceedings still ongoing, papers being signed, meetings with lawyers. Human justice was slow, imperfect, full of holes. But there was also a peace that couldn't be bought, that couldn't be explained, that could only be felt. Helen took a deep breath, feeling in her chest both the weight and the lightness of everything she had lived through. The weight of the pain, the struggle, the fear, the lightness of the victory, the justice, the recovered dignity. There were no newspaper headlines hanging on the wall, no applause or awards, just that grateful silence, full of voices and footsteps, of laughter and tears, of life happening the way it was supposed to. She took the rosary from her pocket, running her fingers over the worn beads that had always been with her. She looked up at the sky, which was beginning to turn shades of orange and pink, that time of day when the sun says its unhurried goodbye, and then simply, as if talking to an old friend who, had always been there, Helen murmured, "In God's time, even chains learn to become a path." The wind blew gently, rustling the leaves of the jaboticaba tree. In the courtyard, Joseph laughed at something Mrs. Teresa had said. The children ran. Martha hummed in the kitchen. Michael and Raymond hammered away, fixing. And Helen, finally, allowed herself to smile, because she knew deep in her soul that she had done what needed to be done, that she had listened when no one else would, that she had seen when everyone else pretended not to, and that, in the end, despite everything, justice was still possible, even for simple people, even for invisible people, even for a housekeeper with a rosary in her pocket and a courage greater than her fear.